some cases it's good to use like a human character to sort of explain like a difficult situation or an emotion. And so we wanted to do it in like a race neutral, gender neutral, age neutral way with those characters.
Today I'm joined by Joe Allison, Head of Product Design at Monese. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm pretty good, thanks.
The first thing to say is Tunde is really gutted that he can't be here. He's super fascinated and loves the way that your product works. So
I really wanted to meet him.
Well, you know, if Tunde you're watching, then I'm sure it was his birthday yesterday, so I'm sure you can wish him a happy birthday. But can you start off by telling us a little bit about what Monese is for those of us out there who are uninitiated?
Sure. So Monese is essentially a banking application for what we call the borderless generation. So like millions of people who kind of live, work or study or retire in another country or have transactional needs with another country. We basically service them. So with Monese you can open up a GBP or a Euro account, and this is a full bank account, so you get sort code and account number, IBAN and BIC. And with this you can receive your salary, pay your bills, make payments locally and abroad, spend abroad or locally. If you spend abroad you get just the real MasterCard exchange rate, no kind of extra fees or anything. You can also make direct debits and standing orders, and we have money management tools like spending insights and also budgeting, savings as well, and kind of fairly recently we've got some new integrations like with PayPal and Avios, so you can basically see your PayPal account and your transaction history within Monese, and also you can earn and spend Avios just by using the Monese product. Really.
Amazing. So it's really comprehensive features there, and I guess one of the things there which is quite interesting is it seems sort of on the current account precipice, but also talking to some of the borderless account, providers like TransferWise. Are they the people you see as your competition? Who are you competing with?
Yeah, this is a good question, really. So, we're competing essentially with a lot of the challenger banks. So, Monzo, Starling, Revolut, N26. Although that kind of being said, like not all of them are in across the whole of Europe. So we operate across the whole of Europe.
Right.
And something that kind of sets us aside is those kind of unique integrations that we've got. And also our design language is a little bit different as well to those players, really.
Yeah.
Over the past few years, right, we've started to sort of see a lot more kind of customers that be open to these new digital banking solutions, as I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah.
And we're all seem to be getting some really nice growth off of this, which is also really good for the customer, really, because they're getting a lot of choice and it's driving a lot of the innovation that's happening as well, which is really good.
Yeah, that's very true. And then you've spoken there a little bit about the design language. I would imagine that's sort of what you're doing mainly at Monese. Is that are you setting that tone and setting that sort of in your position?
Yeah, so I joined Monese like in the middle of 2015, and my job initially, it was when we were just launching our first product, was to essentially kind of design the brand and then redesign the product and align the product with the new brand. So it's a really good opportunity.
It's a really exciting opportunity, that, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, to get the two aligning.
Blank canvas, right?
Yeah, and try and like weave it into the user interface as well, which is really exciting. I mean, my job now is more around kind of building the team and leading the design team and making sure that we share knowledge properly, and also facilitating design sprints within the teams, within the product teams. So helping kind of run those sprints and foster design thinking. Awesome. Leading the design chapter, really.
Yeah. We did a really cool episode, I think it was about 2 weeks ago. One of our Pulse guys was talking about how we've been building Lean UX into our processes, which is a really fascinating sort of insight into that. So it's definitely one to check out. He's done a really great job with it. So what happened before you got to Monese? I guess, have you been in the game before then? Or university or what?
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, I went to University of the West of England in Bristol, studied graphic design.
Very cool city.
Sorry?
Very cool city.
Yeah, it's great. I love Bristol. Bristol, Brighton, London for me. And then, so then I finished there and I started working in like a multidisciplinary design agency doing digital work, which is what really excited me, and like moving image stuff, but also I was doing some print work and editorial content stuff, like working on magazines, which I then wanted to focus more on the digital side, so I worked for an advertising agency called FCB, worked there for a while, then went more into product and started leading a small team in a product studio over in Old Street called Cogent, and then started working at Monese with a couple of people who actually worked at me in FCB, who kind of helped to start up Monese. Really.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, so started going to work with them.
Yeah, but right there at the core. So you're saying there a little bit about the sort of the role now being involved in team management and sort of this sprint practice. But back to the sort of design language, and maybe a little bit more towards those earlier days. How did you decide what was right for the product back then in terms of the design language, in terms of the way that you were trying to influence that sort of side of things back then? What were the factors that you were considering? And then, I mean, it's a really nicely turned out product, so it must have required quite a lot of thought.
Yeah, sure. So it really came from like our customers, really. So our customers back then, when we didn't have a localized product, we've got a fully localized product now in terms of language across I think 15 different languages, but back then it was only in English. So a lot of our customers, as I said, are living in a country where it's not their native language. So we really just wanted to be super clear and concise with the messaging and things like the iconography, pairing iconography with text and illustration, trying to like convey things through pictures as well as really short copy, trying to get things really condensed and clear. But also we wanted to add a lot more kind of excitement and fun into the product as well. We wanted to be different from the big banks. We kind of saw the big banks as being very dull and boring and not engaging, so we wanted to make the product super engaging and also clear for customers who are in a non-native country to them really. So that drove a lot of the early thinking. That
really resonates, because we're not going to take a look at that in this video, but for example, I've seen the onboarding flow for Monese, and one of the really fascinating things there is how you approach things like displaying icons for things like passports. It's unmistakably a passport, the picture, you know what I mean? And it's a weird thing to consider that that's the unique thing, but it is. And even like little driver's licenses, when you're trying to ask us to get sort of your driver's license out, that it's unmistakably that. So you're conveying very, very kind of key sort of important bits of information very succinctly and very directly. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, that's our aim really.
That's the aim,
trying to put some excitement and fun into it as well, really. Yeah.
That's cool.
I guess something else to sort of add to the design language side is we have completely custom components. Well, most of our components we went down the custom route really. So we kind of have one language across iOS and Android. There's a few sort of different interaction things with Android versus iOS. This is kind of giving us a different kind of a unique brand in the interface, which is something that kind of is different to what some of our competitors are doing, and it just gives us an opportunity to kind of build that brand from the beginning.
Sure.
Really. Yeah.
Just to go off piece a little bit here, but I was thinking about what you're saying there about sort of the applying the design language across a load of different localized areas. We have. I'm hoping that we'll be able to speak to one of the guys from N26 soon, who is, of course, they've got a very set sort of product and a design language, and then the key question then from their perspective is how can we implement the sort of marketing strategy that surrounds it, and so make the kind of the product speak the language that the user is sort of interested in listening to. It's very different from a German audience, for example, to a UK audience. Any sort of experience with that? Has that been an issue for you guys?
It has, and it's actually driving a lot of the thinking that we're doing at the moment in terms of a lot of like things to do with language, like how we call an account. Sometimes in some countries they call it like a card. And little things like that that we're trying now to put a lot of focus in fully like localizing the product in Europe and really understanding how to do that properly. So it's definitely driving a lot of our thinking at the moment.
It's fascinating because Europe is is a body which is there are so many different sort of approaches to or understandings of like UI design, and that's super fascinating. Even in a more localized level, for example, Tunde and I think some of his friends are really interested in the idea of how can you design for a black community and sort of like the language which goes around that. And then you've got this larger community of the European sort of design agencies and things like that. And so that must be a real challenge in terms of placing one product in one market and then trying to place it in another market and things like that.
For sure.
It's super fascinating.
I mean, we've got things like, you may have seen our character design.
Sure.
So that was, the thinking around that was to basically, in some cases it's good to use like a human character to sort of explain like a difficult situation or an emotion. So we wanted to do it in like a race neutral, gender neutral, age neutral way with those characters.
Sure.
Bringing those in. So we're now starting to try and explore different ways that we could do that as the design language kind of evolves with the business, really.
Right.
But yeah, that was one of our approaches too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then a final question on this sort of more general level, but I'm interested in sort of the cohort, the sort of the demographic that you're trying to target here. So what does the user usually kind of look like, regardless of geography?
So we have a very
Big
multinational customer base, really. So we have to cater for all audiences, really. That may change in our design language as we go into different markets and stuff. At the moment, we've tried to keep it very scalable and doing things like those kind of humanoid characters. Well, they're not very humanoid actually, but, and making it in a way that can appeal to all demographics. And we don't really. It's very difficult for us to single out one particular demographic that way. So at the moment it's kind of appealing to all.
Yeah, absolutely. And without further ado, I guess we'd better start looking now at the journeys, so the language that we're speaking of. This first one is going to be a look at the transactions. So we'll start off with this. I'll show you if you can see it here.
Yeah.
We've got this sort of top carousel or mid carousel level, and then a transactions feed below it. One thing you can see here initially is sort of logos where relevant for different brands, and then other than that, sort of categorization. And then really smart here, like the ability to build in sort of Google Maps, and then I didn't catch what was at the bottom there. We've drilled in a bit more. And then we've got this sort of like neat little sort of opening times area. That's really pretty fun. Categorization at the top there. And then we can see here an example of what we were talking about earlier. The real crispness of the design is really nice here. The ability to see all of these different images quite clearly conveying in such a small size is really cool. And then I think that's it. Yep. So that is the sort of a really nice overview of the transactions function. So what was so fascinating there is that how much functionality is really packed into that very small sort of what we would consider quite a basic feature. So can you talk to us a little bit about the ability to sort of bake these things into the product? You're designing around things like Google Maps. You've got a responsibility to build in some of these icons and things like that. How do you approach the challenge of sort of ensuring that these things are integrated correctly and that it doesn't interfere with your designs? Is there a way of doing that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it really depends on the integration. We often find that, I mean, learning through some issues that we had initially was early on when we had some providers who we thought we could have real creative freedom over doing absolutely anything we wanted, and we would go into a design sprint and come out with the best flow and the best case possible. But then actually to only then learn that there's some quite prescriptive things that we have to do. So I would say that's been one of our big takeaways, to kind of go into the design sprint with exactly all of the things that we need to know. But then it's really around, I guess, just reading APIs and seeing what's available and deciding what's worthwhile for our customer base. There are some things that we've put in as almost like a test, really, to see if people start using it, and then we'll go back into the next phase and revise that. I mean, things like the opening hours, for example. We might decide to do something different with that. We just need to see if people are using it.
That's fascinating. So kind of, you mentioned their partnerships and access to APIs. I guess that's quite an important thing for like a transactions feed, but a whole host of different features within within the product. So kind of what sort of third parties do you rely upon usually, and what sort of third parties would you usually expect to rely upon for sort of things like this? You know, is it the icons that you're using here, sort of the TFL stuff? Or?
Oh, I see. So we actually made our own kind of service which allowed us to map our own logos to those things. We found that with the API that we were using to get those logos automatically from Google Maps, that the logos weren't very good quality really, so we've just gradually been building those out over time, and we've got a lot of work to do actually to get even more of those in there. But yeah, we've got with thousands of them in there at the moment. yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so in terms of the kind of the information around the shops, the opening times, what was the kind of approach to these different bits of functionality, like of designing these bits of functionality into the app? Is it sort of is that a design decision that's made? Is it a product decision? And how much responsibility do you guys have for sort of testing this stuff out?
Okay. All right. So with those particular decisions, those were design decisions.
Okay.
I mean the collaboration with design and product is an interesting one actually. It's almost a very similar thing in my eyes. And I mean we all work together.
Sure.
Especially when the business was very small, when we were just a tiny team. A lot of those decisions were made sort of purely by working with design and development. And then as the team grows, we get more disciplines on the teams, and then it's more about how do you do that as a team and make the right decisions.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And so sort of what would go into the process of deciding that sort of these functions should be introduced? Is it sort of a finger in the air thing, or?
Oh, I see. So no. So we do a lot of user testing. We'll have a hypothesis of what of this could be a good thing to use. Maybe it's come from some analysis and research, and then we usually test the product with getting users in house or doing it remotely.
Yeah.
And see if it's resonating with users really. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And will you typically have sort of what sort of roles will people play in terms of designing this function? I mean, you've got some really nice interactions, for example, and sort of nice card designs for carousels. Does everyone do different things, or do you have interaction designers? Do you have UI designers, UX designers? What sort of makeup of the team in that regard?
Okay, so in product design, we just have product designers. So we try to build a very strong team of designers who have a broad skill set really, and design and UX, interaction design, illustration, animation, iconography, that's all done by one discipline at the moment, is product design. And I think especially for the stage that we're at now, as long as we hire the right talented people, which we're doing at the moment, we're able to move quickly and keep this consistent in a way that scales really.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay. And then on the sort of those sort of designers, I would imagine, are making decisions, or you as a group will be making decisions. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of the hierarchy that you've got on this particular page here? You know, we've got a very set sort of like, here is a card inviting you to sort of referral functions. Then below there you've got this sort of this transactions feed. What's the thinking there in terms of the page hierarchy and the structure? Is that set by you as a team decision? What sort of things happen there?
Yeah, so that was set by us as a design function, and I mean we have those shortcut icons there, which are essentially like contextual to the account, and then we have the account details above that with the balance, and then those home screen panels, which are like our kind of prime real estate really. And we have some kind of utility panels in there, like your spending overview, or we have some more promotional things like this, inviting friends, which helps to also like boost our business growth, but also it's a really good scheme for the user, so the users can actually make quite a lot of money by this program, and we wanted to let them know about that. It's quite easily dismissible as well, if just with a little X in the corner.
Sure, yeah.
So some of the more promotional things are closable, and some of the more utility things are static. Yeah. Within that.
I also like the idea here of, you know, right within, as you said there, I think it's a really cool expression, the real estate, the middle real estate, kind of the key bit of real estate there in the page, being taken up by this. this is an inherently creative thing, in the sense of you have quite a lot of utilitarianism below there and above there in terms of the hierarchy. You know, your 3 icons there for account money, spending, savings, and then above there the key figure amount, and then below there you've got this sort of, you know, de rigueur transactions area where it's an accepted pattern. It's that sort of thing. But then in the middle you can get a little bit kind of playful with it. Do you find this area sort of changing according to the business goals, and then who's responsible for the design of these things? And I guess that's something that you guys almost really like doing.
Yeah, so it's a real challenge actually. So as we're scaling, as the product teams are all multiplying, every team wants to have something in the panels, and
of course
wants to be promoting something or using it. At the moment, we've had to really kind of map out kind of really who owns what on the home screen, and creating rules around how those are used and what it's used for. So at the moment, we have a core team who kind of owns this from a technical perspective, and then as head of design, I own this from a design perspective. So I kind of set the rules and around how I think they should be used, and teams kind of run their decisions past me as how we do that. I mean, that decision may change later, that mechanism for deciding how it works, but we're also planning a new home screen at the moment. Which,
really?
I'd love to talk about that. I can't show it at the moment, but
it's
got a lot more real estate panels like that, and
Well, you may have to contend with Tunde on that, I'm afraid. He may be dropping you a message about. So yeah, just know that may happen.
Nice.
Next up, we're gonna I think it's the add money bit. Am I right there? Sorry. No, it's spending overview. Okay, cool. Cool. So we're gonna go now. This is another sort of journey, and then we're in the home screen area, and now we've moved through to a sort of one of those icons in the top right, and then these lovely little pies, brightly coloured, and then a sort of feed of different categories below that. We've got corresponding transactions once we've clicked through, and then we can change the sort of format of the information that's on the page there. In the budget area, we've seen this sort of thing a lot, the ability to kind of track it on this sort of dial, and a key health metric there in the percentage term, 68% there. So again, another page where we've managed to quite succinctly and quite impressively cram a lot of knowledge into one area, which is super impressive. So talk a little about sort of the considerations when it comes to visualizing all this information. Did you rely upon previously existing design patterns for that sort of thing? Again, kind of how do you figure out what's the right thing to build at the right time?
Yeah, sure. So, okay. When we spoke to some of our users who we found use similar things like this in other products, we found that some of them, they say they love these tools, but actually when you kind of dig a little bit deeper, they weren't using them all that much.
Okay.
I mean, that's something that we kind of wanted to explore a little bit more, and how could we do this in the most engaging way, but still make it really clear, because it's quite complex information about your spending and stuff. So we tried to design it in a vibrant way, using all those colours, and in a way that would kind of hopefully entice the user in to use it really.
Okay, and sort of the ability to solve a problem seems quite predominant here in terms of making it more usable. Is that what sort of problem are you trying to solve there? What's the core thing that people go to these analytics sort of areas looking for?
Okay, sure. So I mean, when we were doing those interviews, we found a few things. There was a couple of people that were actually taking all their transactions and downloading them as a CSV and running them through Excel and kind of making their own product really to analyze it. And we spoke to one lady who was using a different service just for her TFL trips. So we kind of thought, this is definitely a problem that people have, and they want to visualize their spending. So that was really the user problem that we're solving, and then it was just how do we do this in a Monese way, really?
Okay, cool. Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point. My dad always makes this point as well. He he's not really a tech guy or anything, doesn't have any background in that, but he always says any situation where people are relying upon an Excel spreadsheet is a potential problem. And it's a potential product. I think that's super fascinating and a really astute observation, actually. And so, yeah, you can find that people are behaving in this sort of way via a CSV export or whatever, and then you can apply your own sort of flavor to it. That's a really interesting notion. One of those flavors is the sort of this use of bright sort of color theory. I'd imagine, we saw the percentage dial, 68%. That's in itself is a health metric. Green is for good, right? So sort of what kind of things are you trying to reward there, if anything, and where do you step in if things are not going quite right?
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, as you said, we've got like the green for good when you're well within your budget.
Yeah.
And then it turns orange if you're sort of nearing reaching it, and then red if you're over budget. So that's fairly straightforward, like visual color cue for the user.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like how we set the colors of the categories, we kind of initially we didn't actually have enough colors in the palette, so we started looking at how can we make more colors that kind of go with the primary and secondary palette.
Sure.
And then we started assigning them to some of the categories, but we actually made a bit of a mistake in the beginning. We had our general category for things that outside any of the other categories go into general.
Okay.
And we had that set to being red, and so a lot of people were logging into the app and seeing like the majority of their spending is red, which wasn't good. So we swapped this for the brand Monese Blue,
Mm-hmm.
and then ended up using red for entertainment category. So we know that from some of our interviews that this is one of the categories that people are most kind of cautious of, keeping at bay, and they want to kind of draw attention. We wanted to draw attention to that, really.
Sure. And when you're designing sort of this type of thing where the health metrics are displayed as, really kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's like a super interactive experience, and you're relying quite heavily on a lot of, I would imagine, technical sort of expertise from your software developers and that sort of thing. Did you find there was a trade-off between what you were designing and what was being built from their end? This is one of the things I wrestle with quite regularly in terms of having a product designer I work with and a software developer. One of them says, let's do more, let's do this more, and the software developer saying, let's do less, okay? Yeah. And then you sort of try and find a little sort of shoestring in the middle to tie. Yeah. But it's sort of, do you find this stuff easier to, I mean, does the Monese sort of approach find this stuff easier to design than to build? What's the sort of, how do you measure that and scope it?
Okay, sure. This is always an ongoing, as you say, like where do you sort of tie the knot, really? And it's different, I think, for different stages of the product and the business. I mean, for example, with that spending chart, we were really worried at the time that was going to be too difficult to build. Okay. I mean, we tried to design out all the edge cases and prototype it and test it and stuff. Yeah. But then when we were talking with our engineers, initially they did think this was going to be too difficult. But then when they started looking into it, actually they found that it's definitely challenging, but it was well within their ability to do it in a good space of time, which we thought was amazing. I mean, there was some embellishments that we wanted to put in there, like the ability to animate the graph as you swipe between months, okay, and make a transition between of all the different pieces. Yeah. But that was too difficult to do within the time, so we kind of settled for like a different sort of loading transition.
Okay.
But yeah, I think
it'd be interesting to hear actually what you're saying there. You mentioned a lot about the design sprints that you're managing at the minute. Sort of what sort of methods are you leaning on for that, and what do they look like from your perspective?
Sure. Okay, so we kind of loosely follow the process of the official like sprint book by Jake Knapp.
That's the blue one, right?
Google Ventures, yeah. Green, I think it's blue. Yeah, it is blue. Yeah. And we loosely follow that process, really. It's pretty intense, so it takes up a full week. We don't always do the full week now. We kind of adapt the process depending on the problem. Okay. I mean, the real crux of it is you go into a sprint with a user problem to solve. Then you kind of map out all the different areas of that problem, decide which part that you want to achieve within the week, and then interview lots of people within the business, stakeholders, people who are experts in certain areas, and then start sketching as a team, then start voting on the sketches and deciding which kind of idea and path to go down, and then sketching even more in a bit more detail, then prototyping it out, and then testing it on the Friday. So that week is pretty intense, but we don't always do it exactly like that. Sometimes we spend the week finding the problem and the right solution, and then we'll prototype and test it later on. And then and at that point, the team has a solid sort of direction of where to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does this help you in any capacity with sort of this idea of continuous delivery? Like what we've found with the Lean UX process for the product that we're working on is it helps us to quite nicely design with the sprint cycles of a development team, in the sense of it allows you to bring in different sort of people from the business and have them to put their, lend their own sort of ears to different people's problems, and then to sort of complete that within the regular patterns and cycles of sprint for development teams. How does it work in your place for sort of, is it more of a sort of a waterfall type process, or will you find ways to sync up with the development team in that sort of way?
No, so, when we run these sprints, we bring in all different disciplines from the team. So it's not just designers and product leads. It's we bring in developers as well. Sometimes someone from QA or back end. So everybody on the team is then engaged in solving the problem and can give their insights on how this can be built and sort of shape the design really. And we do this ahead of time from the traditional kind of development sprint. So the developers have then been on board and engaged in the idea, and then can start their kind of work. And the designer will feed into them as their process is going.
And they can raise their concerns early enough at that stage, can't they? I'd imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think otherwise it's quite risky to just go straight into development with it before too much has been planned out. Yeah.
Cool. And then on that note, I guess we'll take a look at the add money function. So this is going to be I forget now. So this is the final journey that we'll look at today, and we've got this sort of little add money icon, and then really super detailed little icons on the left there, and sort of the nice little price tags at the bottom. We're using this little slider to top up the amount that's going into the account, and then top up with our CVV. We've got a linked bank account there at the bottom. Visa card, and then taken through the Santander payment rails, I imagine. And here is our nicely updated account. A nice, short, sweet one there. But sort of one thing we wanted to talk about there was the sort of the displaying of different sort of. You've got a responsibility there to talk about the transparency around sort of fees and things like that. Can you talk about why you've sort of had to approach that, and what were the particular problems or challenges involved with building for lots of different sorts of outcome like that?
Okay, so I mean, with the fees, one of the things that we always try and keep top of mind is basically making it so that if a user's going through the Monese product, they can be kind of. Well, we strive for users to be kind of free from worry when they're using the product. So unless there's a fee that's obviously being highlighted, they can quite easily go through the flows and understand that this service is free, unless it's like specifically stated otherwise, really. It's something we find from user testing a lot. If we don't approach it this way and we don't show a fee and then we start putting a fee right in at the end, users are like, oh my God, how come that you didn't ask me about this before? That kind of thing. So it's I think it's just being fair on users, to be honest, and just highlighting fees whenever they are there. And it's one of the ways that the big banks seem to have not approached this in the best way, and having lots of hidden fees. And we definitely don't want to do that.
Absolutely. Nice to see those little sort of tags at the bottom as well. Like you're not hiding these fees in any capacity. In fact, you're kind of almost elevating them in the sense of they're in green, they're pretty bright, and that in sort of, I guess, would have the reverse effect. People would probably be a lot nicer to you as a result of that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it builds trust and and allows people not to have to worry about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this one is from one of our designers in the team who has a particular dislike of sliders. So you may have to appease his sense of lack of support. But it's an option that you can use. I can imagine that based on what we saw, there's a keyboard option as well, so you've got the ability to do that. What do you get from implementing these type of UI elements, and sort of is it mainly for sort of because it's a nice thing to have, or kind of do you find it functional, and how's it sort of uses? Respond to my design friend who is skeptical.
Sure. Okay, so yeah, I mean, this is something we've thought about quite a bit actually. We felt that giving people kind of like set amounts that they would top up by was something that tested well.
Yeah.
And then combining it with the keyboard entry, so you can actually enter the amount. If you want to put a specific amount in, like £31, for example, you can certainly go and do that.
Yeah.
But this, we tested it and it worked quite well, and we thought we would carry on with that really.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nice, and it seems super usable, and
Yeah.
nice big old button so you can get your thumb on there as well. Again, I guess the final question here will be pertaining back to what we saw earlier, which was the sort of the integration of third-party information into your platform. You have a responsibility here to move through to the gateway of Santander's payment rails for this particular transaction. Kind of what happens there from? Do your users expect that there's going to be some sort of drop off there in terms of the design? Do you have any say over kind of how to prime them for the fact that they're going to be going through to this absolutely horrendous sort of big screen with? It seems like a real problem at the minute, especially with a lot of open banking, the APIs that are available are so horrendous in terms of what we've seen from places like Yolt and Emma, who provide these super slick experiences, but then they go through to a Lloyd's page and it sort of the page won't be sort of appearing correctly sized and that sort of thing. Yeah, and it's a hard thing. It's a hard challenge because it seems like it's a very new challenge to approach. Banks have not had API stood up for some time, so it's a very new thing. It's
something that we're having to investigate a lot now with our marketplace. We have a lot of lead out models. And we're looking at ways that we can prompt users before they're led out to the other page exactly what's going to happen, and that this is a secure page, and that kind of thing. I think within this particular top-ups one, I think that's something we probably need to go back and revisit as well, and prompt them at that stage. That's slightly different in a way because it's it adds a layer of security onto it, so it's something that some users are kind of used to. But I think you're right. We need to
that's interesting.
Need to prompt people.
And if anything, it provides a sort of a nice stark realization of how nicely your product is designed compared to anything.
It's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So just a few questions to round off. Kind of where would you say you are at the minute in terms of Monese? And is there anything you're kind of really a bit sort of excited about for the future? Anything you've mentioned there, the redesign of the landing page?
Yeah, we've got a lot of things actually, exciting things going on at the moment. Yeah, there's there is our kind of plans for 2020 and how we structure the business as a whole, and how we structure the teams. So we're looking at how we group certain teams into tribes. Do we do it by common customer problems or locations, that kind of thing? Yeah. And how do we do that in like a Monese way? And what's our culture going to look like? And also, there's lots of customer problems. Credit. How do we do that in a Monese way? What does it mean for our customers? There's how do we kind of allow people to have financial freedom and be free from worry when using of money when using their account. There are things to do with the new Homescreen. How do we kind of allow users to get a good overview of their financial position just in an easy way? Plenty of interesting challenges at the moment. Yeah,
that's awesome. So you're gonna have a pretty busy 2020 then, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
What are the plans for the future in terms of what you'd like to happen with the design? Is there anything in particular you're pushing for?
Interesting. Okay, so I think we need to kind of double down on our user-centered nature and kind of improve our design thinking within the business and really sort of drive this. Okay. Craft is something that's really kind of front and center for me as well. That's always been something that I've focused on, making sure that we have a really well crafted product, and I think we've achieved it to some degree, but there's still a lot more we can do. So yeah, it's a mixture of those things really, being as user-centered as possible and fully localizing the product as well. So we're starting to do that in Europe now with local IBANs. There's a lot of kind of IBAN discrimination in Europe. Some companies don't like to pay to an IBAN outside of their country.
Sure.
So we're really focusing on fully localizing that offering to our customers as well. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a really exciting sort of next few years or so. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Stop by next week when we'll take a look at some more sort of insights and user journeys. If you want to see a little bit more of Pulse, head over to pulse.11fs.com, where you can also request a demo. If you've got any questions about the product or want to suggest a journey for us to include on our platform or on this show, hit us up on pulse@11fs.com and find us on Twitter @11fspulse. Joe, where can people find out about you?
I'm on Twitter sometimes. We're @Joe_Allison. So yeah, follow me on there. Same with Instagram.
And Monese as well, and on Instagram to get some of that design loving.
Yes.
Great, thank you very much for coming on the show today. It's great to have you on.
Oh, it's been lovely, yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Homescreen is a show about all things product and design, where we showcase some of the best examples of user experiences from the 11FS Pulse research platform, which includes over 2,500 user journeys from financial service products around the world.